Hello and welcome back to Something Z, and welcome to What If Deku Was a Saiyan Part 3. Last time on the What If, the USJ attack happened with Zuko surviving but getting very injured by the end of the attack, and afterward Zuko got a power-up when he got healed by Recovery Girl, giving him the strength of 1 for all at 8% without any weight. Okay, so now that's out of the way, let's jump into the video in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so we begin this What If a couple of days after the attack, since after the attack, UA gave Class 1A time to rest, and during that time, Zuko kept training and reading the book Goku gave him, with him now being a bit better at shooting out ki blasts, so it takes less time to generate, and the blasts are more powerful. So now we skipped to when Class 1A got back to school, and when the school day began, Aizawa announced that they will be having the sports festival in about 2 weeks, and hearing this, Class 1A was hesitant since they were just attacked. But hearing this, Aizawa told them that they need to have the festival, or they would be sending out a message saying that they can't be stopped after one attack. And hearing this, the class calmed down. So now we skip to the end of the day, and when Zuko got to the field, he began to skim the book again for a new technique. And after a minute, he found the next thing that would be good for him to learn, which was flight. So Zuko, after reading on how to do it, began to practice, with him at the end of the day having minimal progress, so he can make himself float a bit when he jumps. So now we skip to the day of the festival, and Zuko by this point has gotten good at flight, with him being able to fly at a speed of 25 miles per hour, with him being able to fly for a span of 10 minutes before he starts to feel drained. And before the festival started, Todoroki walked over to Zuko, and he told him that he was going to beat him, since the way Todoroki saw this was he wanted to beat someone with super strength, even if it's not All Might level or the same power set, so he can prove he doesn't need his fire side to be strong. And before Zuko could respond, the festival started, so Ida told everyone to walk into the stadium, and when all the participants were there, Midnight, who was their main instructor, told them that they will be doing an obstacle race, and when she was done talking, everyone lined up in front of a big hallway, and when everything was ready, the race began, with everyone running down the hallway, except for Zuko, who when he saw that the hallway was hard to walk through, he began to fly, and with this, he was somewhere in the front of the group since he could actually move. But when Zuko passed Todoroki froze the ground in the hallway, which stuck many of the racers in place, allowing Todoroki to run out of the hallway without any problems. And when Zuko cleared the hallway, he landed and he began to run, with him somewhere in the front of the race. And after a minute of running, the group starts to get surrounded by robots from the entrance exams. But even with this, Zuko was able to keep going, since whenever they got in front of him, he would shoot out a ki blast, which would destroy the robot after 1 or 2 hits. But after another minute of running, they all noticed that in front of them were multiple 0-pointers, and before Zuko could even get to the 0-pointers, Todoroki ran under one, and he froze it in place while it was off balance, making the robot fall to the ground, crushing 2 people, with them being Kirishima and Tetsu. And seeing this, Zuko rose into the air and he began to fly over the fallen 0-pointer, and when he began to clear it, he noticed that behind him was Bakugo flying right at him, and before Zuko could react, Bakugo fired an explosion at his face, which made Zuko distracted for a couple of seconds, and while he was distracted, Bakugo fired an explosion which flung him directly at Todoroki, making him tied for first place. And when Zuko was able to see again and get his breath back, he saw the two fighting for first, so he flew to the ground as fast as he could, and when he landed, he began to run as fast as he could towards the two, and after a minute, he was a couple of feet away from the two, but before he caught up, the group of runners come across a ravine, and when Zuko got to the ravine, he flew to the other side as fast as he could, and by the time he got to the other side, Bakugo and Todoroki got to the other side as well, with the 3 of them being tied for first place, and the 3 ran until they got to a minefield, and when they got to it, Bakugo and Zuko went into the air, and they began to fly over the mines, while Todoroki made ice under himself, and he began to run on the ice, making it so he didn't have to worry about the mines, and while the 3 were trying to get to the other side of the field, the 3 were fighting, with Bakugo firing his explosions, Todoroki dodging and blocking, and Zuko punching, and after a couple of minutes, the 3 were coming across the end of the field, and seeing that they were close, Zuko knew that he needed to do something, so when they were a couple of feet away from the end of the minefield, Zuko flew a couple of feet up, while still going straight, and when he was high enough, he began to fire out ki blasts towards the ground in front of them, which activated the mines, and the combined explosions from the mines were enough to blast the 2 away a couple of feet, with Todoroki landing on his eyes not activating the mines, and Bakugo firing explosions right before he hit the ground, allowing him to not set off any mines either. And while they were distracted, Zuko kept on going, and after a couple of seconds, the 2 were able to continue going as well, with Zuko now in the lead. And after a minute, the 3 were able to get to the stadium, with Zuko getting first place, Todoroki getting second, and Bakugo getting third. So now we skipped when everyone was able to make it back, and when they did, they were told that they will be doing a cavalry battle. Then on a giant screen in front of them, Midnight showed the participants the headbands they have, and since Zuko got first place, he had the 10 million point headband, and after that, they were given 15 minutes to find a team. But again, since Zuko had the 10 million point headband, no one wanted to team up with him. But luckily, after a couple of minutes, he was able to find Ida and Ochako, and he asked them to join him, which Ochako agrees to, but Ida however declines, and he tells him that Todoroki is not the only one that wants to beat him, and that he doesn't want to be in his shadow, and after he said that, he walked away, and he went to join Team Todoroki, and after some time, Zuko was able to create the same team as he had in the canon. So when the time was up, everyone put on their headbands, and when they were ready, the event started, and when it did, Team Zuko tried to stay out of fighting anyone who seemed to be too much of a challenge for them, since they wanted to play a defensive battle, and after a couple of minutes, Zuko Izuku was able to keep his 10 million point headband, and his team was able to get a couple of headbands from the people who tried to come after them. But after a couple minutes, Team Todoroki appears in front of them, and they tried to attack Team Izuku with an ice attack, and in response, Izuku told his teammates to duck. And when they did, he shot out a couple of ki blasts, which were strong enough to damage the ice enough so the ice would stop moving. Then Team Izuku moved to Todoroki's left side, because when they were on his left, Todoroki wouldn't be able to hit them with his quirk without hitting Ida, and they tried to play a defensive strategy. But after a couple of minutes, Ida decided that he needed to go all out, so he told his teammates to hold on. And when they did, Ida fired up his engine and he used his reciprocal burst. And before Izuku was able to react, Team Todoroki was able to run to his team. And before Izuku was able to react, Team Todoroki was able to get in front of them, and they were able to grab the 10 million point headband. And seeing this, Team Izuku knew that they had to get the headband back, since for this whole event they were being mostly defensive, so they don't have enough points to go to the next event. So Team Izuku then began to run Team Todoroki, and while they were running, Todoroki fired ice attack after ice attack, which they were able to dodge. And after some time, Team Izuku was able to get to Team Todoroki, and when Izuku got to Todoroki, he went to grab the 10 million point headband. But when he went to grab the headband, Todoroki went to swat his hand away, but while his arm was moving, Todoroki used his fire side, so his arm was on fire. And when he realized this, he turned off the flame as fast as he could, but Izuku had enough time to actually notice, and was Todoroki distracted, Izuku was able to grab what he believed was a 10 million point headband, and when he did, he wrapped it around his neck. Then he and his team backed up, and when he was a couple of feet away, he went to check the headband he grabbed, to make sure it was secured on his neck. But when he actually realized it, he realized that he didn't actually grab the 10 million point headband, and even with his new headband, they still didn't have enough points to pass. So Team Izuku ran at Team Todoroki as fast as they could, with a couple seconds left before the event ended, and they got close to Team Todoroki, but before Izuku was able to get any of Todoroki's headbands, the time ended. And when it did, Izuku began to apologize for not getting his team enough points, but while he was apologizing, Tokoyami told him to look at the leaderboard, and when he did, he saw that they somehow got enough points to pass, and when Izuku looked back, he saw Tokoyami holding onto a new headband he just got off of Todoroki, while he wasn't paying attention. And after this, the students had a lunch break, and because Izuku doesn't have one for all, Todoroki doesn't have his conversation with Izuku. So now he skipped to when lunch was over, and when all the first years were back at the middle of the stadium, Midnight told them that the next phase of the festival will be 1v1s, and after the names of the matchups were revealed, Ojiro and someone from Class 1B forfeited, since they both felt like they didn't deserve it. And after they changed the name, the students in the first match went to the prep rooms to prepare themselves, which were Izuku and Shinso, while the rest of the first years went to the bleachers to watch. And while Izuku was preparing, Ojiro walked into the room, and he began to tell Izuku about Shinso, and what his quirk seemed to be. And by the time Ojiro was done, the match was about to begin. So Izuku then began to walk to the stadium, while Ojiro went to the bleachers. And when both Shinso and Izuku got to the battle arena in the stadium, Midnight began to count, and when she got to 0, the match began. And when it did, Izuku closed his mouth, and he began to walk towards Shinso. And while Izuku was walking towards Shinso, Shinso began to tell Izuku how lucky he was to be born with such a good quirk. And seeing that it wasn't working, Shinso began to tell Izuku how stupid Ojiro was to give up his spot in the final part of the festival, which did make Izuku want to talk, to tell Shinso to shut up, but he still kept his mouth shut. And eventually he was able to make it to Shinso, and the two began to fight. But since Izuku had the upper hand because of his strength, he was able to easily throw Shinso out of the arena. And when Shinso hit the ground, Izuku was labeled the winner of the match. And afterward, he went to Recovery Girl's office to heal up the scratches Shinso made on him. And while Izuku was walking to the bleachers to watch the next match, he comes across Endeavor, who tells him he has potential to be a challenge for Todoroki. And he tells Izuku to make Todoroki go all out and use his fire side. And after he was done saying that, Izuku began to walk away. And while he was walking, he told him that Todoroki wasn't him. And when Izuku turned the corner, he began to question why Todoroki was not going all out. So now he skipped to when the match was about to begin. And when it did, Izuku began to fight by running head on towards Todoroki. And in response, Todoroki fired an ice attack, which was taller than Izuku. And seeing this, Izuku fired a couple of ki blasts at the ice, which was strong enough to make the ice break and stop moving. And seeing that, Todoroki began to fire ice attack after ice attack, which made Izuku have to shoot ki blast after ki blast. And after a couple of minutes, Izuku was starting to get tired from using so much ki, so he began to scan Todoroki while he was jumping around to avoid Todoroki's ice attacks. And after Izuku shot out a ki blast directly at Todoroki, he noticed when Todoroki avoided the attack that he was slower than he should have been, and eventually after a couple of seconds he realized that ice was surrounding Todoroki's side, and that he was trembling. So Izuku then asked why wasn't he going all out, and in response, Todoroki told him to shut up and fight, and he then fired an ice attack at Izuku, but Izuku was able to run out of the way of the attack in time. And when Izuku was out of the way, he ran at Todoroki again, and for the first time in the fight, he actually hit Todoroki in the gut, launching him across the arena. But before he went too far, Todoroki covered Izuku's right arm with ice, and before he was fired out of the arena, Todoroki made an ice wall, which allowed him to stay in. And when Todoroki was standing again, Izuku told Todoroki to go all out, and he told him that if he didn't, he wouldn't be able to win. And hearing this, Todoroki asked him if his father told him to say this, but Izuku then shook his head, and he told him that he didn't care what his father told him, but instead he cares that he isn't actually trying, since everyone else that participated in this event has tried their very best to show everyone what they had. And after some arguing, Izuku Izuku shouted that it was his power, not his. And hearing this, Todoroki began to reflect on everything. And after a couple of seconds, Todoroki's right side got engulfed in flames. And seeing this, Izuku walked over to the other side of the arena. And when Izuku got to his side, he took off his weights. And when the two were ready, the two went for one final clash, with Todoroki launching the biggest size attack he could muster, which was too high for Izuku to jump over. So seeing this, Izuku jumped as high as he could, and when he reached maximum height, he flew as fast as he could, and he was barely able to get above the ice. And while he was flying, he was channeling ki into his hands and making a Kamehameha. And seeing that Izuku made it over the ice, Todoroki fired a huge wave of fire. And seeing this, Izuku began to fire his Kamehameha. But before the attacks could collide, Cementos made a wall, since he and Midnight were scared that if their attacks hit, they would have killed each other. And even though the wall was there, Izuku kept firing his ki blast, since he couldn't see it in time. And since he was filled with adrenaline and emotions, he couldn't stop himself from going all out. And while Izuku was shooting the last of his beam, his hair started to flash on and off yellow, with the last millisecond being yellow. But before Izuku could finish using all of his ki, the attacks finally hit the wall, and when they did, it created a giant explosion, which destroyed almost the entire arena, and there was smoke filling the arena. And when the smoke cleared enough, the people were able to see that Todoroki was still barely standing inside of the arena because of the wall he made earlier. And when they eventually found Izuku was on the ground outside the arena, right next to the walls of the stadium, and he was knocked out, with some parts of his body bleeding. And shortly after that, Izuku was taken to Recovery Girl to get healed up. And this time, since he wasn't as injured as he was after the USJ, he doesn't get his Zenkai boost, so now he skipped past the rest of the matches, with the results being the exact same. And after the award ceremony, Class 1A went back to their class, and when they did, they were told that they will have the next 2 days off. And before Izuku left, Ochako and Ida asked Izuku why did his hair turn yellow, since when he was flashing hair colors, he was out in the open. And when Izuku hears this, he told them he didn't have a clue, and shortly after that, he quickly ran to the field. And when he got there, he began to skim the book, and eventually he came across Super Saiyan, and how to activate it. So he then began to train with him having little to no results, with him only being able to keep up the form for a couple of seconds after the end of the day. And he began to train to keep up the new form for the next 2 days, with him now being able to keep up the form for a minute. And when he's in that form, his power is doubled. So without his weights, his power is the same as 16% of One for All. Okay, so now we skip to the next day of class, and when it started, Aizawa showed them on the front board their names, and the amount of heroes that wanted to scout them for the hero internships, and the amount everyone got was mostly the same. But this time, Izuku got more requests, since he showed how powerful he is, and how useful his quirk could be. But before they were able to choose a hero to intern for, Midnight walked into the room and she told them that they will be coming up with hero names, and the name Izuku chose was the martial hero, Deku. And the reason he goes with Deku is the same reason he goes with it in the canon, since his backstory is basically the same. And after they came up with hero names, they began to look for an agency to intern for. And after a couple of hours, Izuku chose the pro hero Gunhead. And the reason he did this is because he's a hero specialized in close quarters combat. And even though Goku made him stronger, he didn't really specifically train him to fight, so he sees this as a good way to get stronger. So now we skip to when the internships were about to begin, and Class 1A is currently at the train station, about to go off. And when Nito was ready, he began to walk to his train. And seeing this, Izuku and Ochako walked over to him, and they told him that they were his friends, and that he could tell them anything. And hearing this, he nods his head and he continues to walk away. And after he walked away, the two walked over to their train. So now we skip to when the two get their temporary room set up. And when they were done, Gunhead took Izuku and Ochako out for a patrol around the city. And while they were on patrol, Gunhead asked them what specifically their quirks were, and what their current weaknesses were. And after they were done with the patrol, they were given the rest of the day off to get their bearings and get to know the people in the agency. Then when it was the next morning, their training began, with them practicing proper fighting form. And when it was after lunch, they began to fight the people in the agency, so they could practice fighting actual people using what they just learned. And they did that for the rest of the day. And the next day, they began to fight using their quirks to see how they can use them in close combat. And during that day, Izuku practiced shooting out fast, small ki blasts. So for example, he does a punch, and before his opponent could react, he could shoot out a ki blast, which would make them more open to attack them more. And this type of training kept going on until the internships were done. And when it was night, Izuku for an hour would train using his Super Saiyan to increase his time limit, so he can now keep up the form for 20 seconds. But sadly, the day before the internships ended, it was announced that Ida had died in Hosu, presumably because of the hero killer. And right next to him, the hero native was also found dead. And this is where I'm going to leave the what if. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time on Something Z.